So take this period of time, man. What do you got?
All right.
What's the questions?
First thing is about the last thing we talked about. The best thing a maturing man can do is meet intelligent women.
Oh yeah, it's a good one.
That's a good one. What do you think about it?
It's important, man, because you need to feel that like deep sense of connection. You need to feel like you're communicating, and it's not just a relationship based on like physical attraction or anything like that. It's based on your ability to really have a real relationship and cultivate that. I think so often in our culture, it's things become about superficial things. So people think that's what a relationship is. It's about your status or how you look. It has to be deeper. So forming emotional connections or intellectual connections and forming real, I'll say real friendships, right? Real relationships that are actually friendships is something that's incredibly important to do from a young age because that's what allows you to understand what human relationship is and not start to base things on false concepts.
Mm. I notice a lot, the people I've asked this question, they don't think it's possible for men to have platonic relationships with women. I don't see it that way personally. What do you think?
I think the problem is there's a lack of human relationship,
Mm.
right? So what human relationship is really seeing someone for who they are and loving and appreciating and respecting that person. Without that, there is no relationship at all. So whether that's romantic or whether that's a friendship, anything, right? If you can't have that level of relationship, you don't have anything. So people will say, "Oh, I'm in a relationship with this person." My first question is, do you really know them? Are you really able to see them at like a soul level for who they are? And do you love and respect and appreciate them? If the answer is no, you don't have a relationship.
Mm. Do you think it's just they get together for the simple pleasures or?
I think not a lot of people know themselves. So the most important thing is what I would say is to know yourself first. Understand who you are, understand what matters to you, because life, it's a short thing. Understand what's important. Find yourself, find your character, find your spirit, find your essence, and then find someone to share that with in an authentic way. So I think a lot of people never do that. So when they have relationships, it's a relationship between two people who don't know themselves. And
Interesting.
so when you're in that situation, the best you can have is something superficial or something that's purely sexual or something that's based on status. Because there's no real human connection because you're not really connected to yourself.
So my next question there would be, how do you find yourself?
So that's a hard process. That requires, we were talking about this for a little while. It requires a lot of introspection, requires the ability to look deeply, to sit in silence, to even do writing, right? To even start writing and try to figure out, to work through your mind, to process your thoughts and your feelings, and not just to regurgitate. Most people are a combination of impressions. It's a good quote that I like. You're based on what your parents told you you should be, or you're based on what your society told you you should be. You're based on all of these different ideas that are not yours. And that forms the entirety of most people's personalities. You're based on what other people tell you you should be, or what you should look like, or what you should do, or what you should think. And so to really be able to sit in silence and work through all of those ideas and those impressions and to find yourself beneath all of that is the most important thing. But that requires a lot of patience, a lot of practice, and a lot of stillness. And a lot of people don't feel like they have time for that in this world because there's so many distractions, right?
Something interesting I've found with myself is I feel like I have too much time for that. And what I found myself doing like a year ago is I'd go too far in that direction of, sit in a room, get a journal out, start writing, but I'd never actually get the other side of that, which is the experiences, which I felt like also helped me dictate, okay, who am I? You learn a lot
Yes.
about yourself based off, what you go through and how you react to things. And I lack
Mhm.
that, a big part of that. How important would you say is that other side, getting those experiences?
It's 100% important. You need both. But I think the issue is it's much less people like you who avail themselves of that. Our global environment right now is far too far tipped to distractions, to outward impressions, to ideas that someone else has. Not a lot of people function like you. So for someone like you need to find the ability to balance that outward experience as well. To go out and have experiences with people, to meet people, as you say you've been doing. You're balancing your personality. So that's another aspect of this, right? Is that a lot of people don't see the sides of themselves that need to be balanced. So if you're someone who's very introverted or you're someone who's very introspective, cultivating that outward quality is going to be the challenge for you. Vice versa for someone who's very outwardly motivated, finding the inner quality is going to be the challenge for you. But a lot of people aren't able to conceptualize that and see those two dynamics and work on balancing them because that's what creates a healthy individual.
Mm. I remember once we were talking about that balance, and you said for some people it is impossible to be proficient at both, the inward side and the outward side, social proficiency and we'll say intellectual proficiency.
So there's everyone has a dominant side. It's like having a dominant hand, right?
Mm.
The difficulty is cultivating the weak side of yourself. So if I'm someone who's predisposed to making art, I could be a very successful artist, but making art is important for everyone to engage that creative side of yourself. And people will approach that for the first time and they'll say, I'm not good at this. I'm a bad artist. There's no such thing as a bad artist. What you're not very good at is engaging that side of yourself and cultivating it. And so people will stop doing that out of a fear of not being good at it. You could be someone who's born naturally with a very strong sense of intelligence, very high intelligence. Or you could be someone who's born naturally very predisposed to an athletic practice. You're very physically prepared for athletics. Neglecting that, especially if you're not already good at it, is going to make it worse. It's like you and I talk about the gym, or we're hanging out in the gym. The muscles, if you already don't have good musculature and you don't engage it, it's just going to atrophy that much worse over time, right? So
Mm.
most people will never begin with things they're not naturally good at. So yes, someone with a high ability or high predilection towards intelligence is going to be able to engage that faculty and make gains much faster. Someone else who's not as highly intelligent. That
Mm.
doesn't mean you shouldn't engage that side of yourself.
Mm. Do you think no matter how hard someone can work, they will always live with a surplus in one and a deficit in another? Some people can't attain a balance.
So think of it in terms of nature. Nature, everything is always in flux, but everything is also attempting to achieve homeostasis, right? The body temperature, our bodies seek to maintain a certain temperature, right? It's like 98.3 degrees, but that's never constant, right? Because environments and ecosystems are always in flux.
Mm.
Thermodynamics is a system that is continually exchanging energy. It's not perfectly closed. It can't sustain itself privately, right?
Mm.
So you're living in an entire ecosystem that attempts to maintain balance, but is consistently tipping to one side or another. So it's a constant practice to maintain that within yourself, right? Constantly finding your ability to achieve balance, right?
Yeah.
That's an ongoing process. It's active because you might make gains in one aspect of your life, right? I've gone through periods where I made a lot of gains intellectually or creatively. And then the physical side of my life started to atrophy because I wasn't paying enough attention to that aspect, right? So it's a balancing act and it never ends because that's what life is. It's flux, it's change.
Mm. This is an interesting one. A lot of times recently, I've been looking into like, I got a blood test. I've been looking at deficits in my blood. I'm vitamin D deficient, right? And so I've been taking supplements. I wake up angry most days, and I was never aware of that, but I started taking this and I feel better. So I was curious. Do you take any supplements? Do you have any deficiencies?
I don't go too deeply into that. I try to listen to my body. I'm sure there's probably something or a couple of things, right?
Yeah.
But I try I think again, because this all comes back to listening and getting attuned to different aspects of yourself, whether it's physically or psychologically or emotionally. I think your body is always trying to tell you something. You're always Your body is always trying to engage you and trying to tell you something about where you're at with yourself, what you need, what you have too much of, what you don't have enough of. And most people are not in dialogue with themselves at a deep enough level to perceive that, right? Which is why we have a lot of issues with medical health crises in this country, psychological health crises in this country, or in other places in the world as well. And it connects for me pretty intimately and directly to the way that we treat the earth and the larger ecosystem. We have these ideas of what we think we want and we think we need, and we're moving from here. We're not moving from a full body, holistic perspective of what our bodies are telling us. And our bodies are very intelligent, but we don't really listen to that much anymore. We're too caught up in our minds and what we think we want and what we think we need. So I'm not disavowing supplements and I'm not disavowing medicine at all, because having the level of intelligence and awareness that medical technology can provide, that's an abundance, right? That's an excess of what a lot of us can perceive. But getting more in tune with our bodies helps us get in touch with things that sometimes our medical technology can't even pick up. So I think it's a balance, right? You're listening to yourself and you're availing yourself of technology. It's like connecting over Zoom, you
Mm.
know? I
Yeah,
hope that
yeah.
makes sense.
You say like picking up things that medical instruments couldn't. What do you think that would be?
So this goes pretty deep. And so there's a really great psychologist whose name is Gabor Mate.
I've
And
heard of
he
them. Yeah.
talks, yeah, so yeah, I think he's one of the most important people that's talking today. And it's
Mm.
because of what he says about illnesses and how illnesses start in the body, particularly chronic illness. He says, based on all of his work, decades and decades and decades of working with some of the best medical professionals across disciplines around the world, he has been able to understand that a lot of chronic illness comes directly from unacknowledged and unprocessed emotions, feelings of extreme anger or extreme pain or extreme sadness. And the fact that we don't process these things inside of ourselves and become emotionally fluent is creates tension, creates stress, creates pressure inside of the body. And we're holding that inside of ourselves. It's deep pain and deep suffering, but these are things that you might pick this up on an EKG, right? You might say someone's heart rate or their blood pressure, right? All of these different ways that we measure pressure and stress inside of the body with medical instruments. But we're not actually diagnosing the deeper, I would almost say more spiritual problems that we experience as human beings through profound unprocessed emotion, because we're not getting into that level of being in touch with ourselves. And then people will see very chronic, very serious illness arise. And he'll have conversations with these people and he'll get deeper and deeper and deeper into their unprocessed emotions. And someone will say something like, I never forgave my mother or this person for this, that, and the third thing. And I will be honest with you, every single day of my life, I've woken up in a state of like profound rage. Right. And so then he connects that and he says, this person has a debilitating chronic illness. This person has spent every day of their lives for the past 30 years in a state of profound rage. We need to start to understand how our spiritual or our psychological condition influences our physical one, because our bodies are interconnected ecosystems, right?
Mm. How would you say you learn your own body in that way
Presence, learning how to be present without imposing ideas,
without
right?
imposing ideas?
Yeah.
So
So,
without forcing a conscious narrative, you mean?
so here's the way that I've conceptualized it. And I like Carl Jung a lot. I like Freud. I like a lot of classic psychology. And I like a lot of classic philosophy as well as modern stuff. But I think of it like this. Most people live their lives entirely up here in their heads. Everything is a constant inner dialogue of thoughts that some of them you could say are ours, and some of them are other people's judgments, whether that's your society, your culture, your parents, whoever it is, authority figures, whatever it is. And so you're living this battle inside of your head all the time. And that's what tortures people, right? That's for me is a source of most of the suffering that we experience as human beings. Because the in advent of the forebrain, right, the components of the forebrain in the human species is something that has occurred over the past couple hundred thousands of years. And that means it's very new in an evolutionary sense. So we're dealing with a technology that we don't know how to use, really, as a species. It's similar to having something like AI. We're still
Mm.
trying to figure out what it is, what it means. And in a lot of ways, the forebrain is a human form of artificial intelligence. Living up here, yeah, you're good.
Yeah.
Okay. Living up here is we're trying to reconcile what the mind is and what it's for. And we're suffering with our thoughts, right? So a big part of that is understanding that the mind, what we're thinking and what's going on up here is not life. It's one small aspect of the entire experience of a human being.
Mm.
We're so much deeper in an evolutionary sense than just the forebrain. That's 100,000 years. This back here is millions and millions and millions of years,
Yeah.
right? So understanding that we're trying to free ourselves from a new piece of technology we don't really get yet.
Mm. How would you say you know when you've learned something? Because I've heard you speak a lot and you've thrown a lot of concepts at me, and they're all very profound. And I think they're neat, but I can't, relate to all of them, of course. I'm still young.
Mhm.
How do you know when something's no longer regurgitation of an idea you heard somewhere else? And how do you know when it's an applied principle of yours, no longer just something taken in from outside?
It's like a digestion,
Mm.
integration. You have to decide, right? No one's going to have the right answers for you, right? Everyone's going to perceive the world differently. There are some like immutable truths, right? Like thermodynamics is an immutable truth. Like we don't need to agree it's happening, right? So the immutable truths are the things I think we really need to know. And what you're talking about is a good question because I try to base my life around truth, but we're very limited, right? So it's this fine line between I'm trying to understand and use concepts and I'm trying to actually experience reality and then chart my course through that experience of truth.
Mm.
I don't think there's an easy answer to that.
Yeah.
I don't, so I personally wouldn't say that I have this under wraps, right? I think I'm in the process of still trying to understand. There's a lot of physical principles that help guide me, and that's mostly just due to science.
Mm.
But that's always science is an evolving discipline,
Yeah.
as is everything else. We're never done truly understanding,
Mm.
so to speak.
Which philosopher would you say taught you the most?
That's a great question. I'd probably say Nietzsche, honestly.
I've heard that
So
name. Yeah, you told me about him.
if I were to recommend any philosopher to you, I would probably say Nietzsche because his foundational idea is that we need to strip everything away from our illusions, strip everything away from what we think we believe, and come into an experiential, like a real experience of who we are.
Mm.
So he says the wisdom in your body or your body holds more wisdom than your greatest philosophy. So what we really need to do is strip away every idea of who we think we are and actually experience who we are. And there's a much deeper wisdom there than there is in our ideas. We can get close to it with science. I can talk about I keep saying thermodynamics, but I could talk about thermodynamics, or I could talk about cosmology and how the universe is structured in a galactic sense. And all of these
Mm.
ways are different ways for us to understand how we are a part of the bigger picture, how the whole is a part of us and we are a part of the whole. But it ultimately always comes back to the experience of being human,
Mm.
which is in the body.
Yeah,
It's not the mind.
that segues us nicely. You told me in 2020, like back in your training in 2023, gym training, you like hit a wall. You pushed yourself to the absolute maximum you could, well, handle, right?
Yeah, sure.
I had something recently. I was just wondering if you could tell me more about that.
Um, so I think for someone like you, you're in a good position because you're serious about weightlifting already. I think it's really important to be serious about weightlifting, regardless of who you are. Um, because it's what helps you understand the boundaries and limits of your body, the capacities and potentials of your body. Learning how to push yourself in a physical and a psychological sense because they're intertwined. And we talked about that in terms of neuroscience. Neuroscience is the connection between the body and the mind, the physical and the psychological.
Mm,
So there are limits to being human, right? There are limits to living in a physical body. And I don't think a lot of people ever understand those. We have a lot of problems with obesity as a society and as a global culture. Um, and a lot of it comes back to us not understanding in a very um, with humility and with a kind of grace and with a kind of really nurturing the body what our limits are. But you can't understand those if you don't find them. So that's why I encourage like it has to be intelligent, but finding where that limit is for you is empowering.
mm.
It's a struggle, but it's empowering because then you start to find the outlines of who you are as a person and what you're capable of.
Would you say your training then helped with that,
Absolutely. I think it was
intentionally
the
or
only thing.
unintentionally?
I think there is an issue for me. I have a high capacity intellectually, so I can push myself and I can go way off a cliff into abstraction, whether that's metaphysics, whether that's science, whether that's math or symbols, whatever it is. That to me has been very destructive, actually, because the mind is such an unruly. The mind can go anywhere, right? We see this with people who have mental illness. We see this with our greatest scientists and philosophers and artists. The mind is almost untethered in a lot of ways. But the physical limits of the body, I think, are the most grounding force that someone can experience. And so if you're someone who has that intellectual capacity, like myself or like you or like anyone else, you find those limits, you ground yourself in the body, and you're actually informed more about your humanity there than I think you can be intellectually.
Could you sort of demonstrate this relationship with I've had a few experiences where I'll be working on something and the night gets late and my mind can still output, right? I'm still working, I'm still working, I'm still working. I'm on my computer doing something, writing, doing what have you. And then it gets so late to the point where my body can't handle it anymore
Yeah,
and I need to go to sleep.
sure.
But my mind has more it wants to give. Is that sort of what you're conveying here?
So it's the idea of people's minds because you don't have control or discipline over your mind and you let your mind run endlessly. And I have this happen to me all the time. And I think it's constant. No matter how maybe you can get really good at it, right? But I think it's still part of the process is that your mind can run endlessly because you don't have control over it. It's like imposing discipline and structure as you do with the physical body, right? Whether that's in the gym or whether you're meditating or whatever it is. But the mind is a piece of technology, right? There's so much power there that we don't really understand yet. There's a lot of science that's been done on the electromagnetic capacity of the brain as itself is a field. It's the second biggest field in the body next to the heart. There the way that your brain runs on glucose and how the nutrition that you contribute the nutrition that you put in your body contributes to the health of your brain. There's a lot of things that we still don't understand, and neuroscience is on the cutting edge of that. I personally think the brain is I think probably the greatest piece of technology that exists in nature, just because of what it allows us to do. I think if you cultivate it in the right way, you can actually understand nature
Mm,
itself and yourself as a part of nature, which is something that you don't see um, in the surrounding ecosystem, right? Animals live in the moment. We're able to reflect.
mm,
It's pretty profound. Um, but a lack of discipline with the mind is what allows it to take energy from you, if that makes sense. Because it's a piece of technology that's it's energy hungry, right? It's something that will use immense amounts of energy to perform tasks, even just basic tasks like keeping you alive.
Mm.
Um, I'm trying to think of a good way to sum this up, but the discipline with the mind allows you to conserve energy for the body and conserve energy for the mind when you want to use it to accomplish a task. So, yes, the mind will run, but learning how to discipline your mind can save you energy for when you actually need it, if that makes sense.
Do you think, like all things in nature, the mind and body exist in a balance?
So, I think the mind is more advanced, right? So, and that obviously is different for different people. We talked about IQ. We talked about um, the processing speed, the difference in processing speed that different people have. Um, the brain is just, it's newer. It's like, let's say the body is like a BlackBerry, right? And the forebrain, at least the brain where the part of the brain where you actively process thoughts and ideas is the iPhone 16.8 or whatever it is now, right? That's not going to be in balance because the technology is way too modern. It's way too sophisticated. So it's going to process energy better and it's going to demand more energy, right?
Mm. When you're my age, I'm sure you encountered problems. Consciously or unconsciously, you tried to solve them. What were
Mm.
those problems? And how did you solve them? And how do you wish you solved them?
Uh, Man, other people, honestly.
Really?
I had a huge problem with other people and a huge problem with myself. Because if you don't know yourself, and especially at your age, you don't know yourself and you're surrounded by other people who don't know themselves, right? So it's a disaster. It feels like a car crash. I mean, that's kind of what it felt to me for that whole time. I think the way I dealt with it was like drugs and distractions, like partying and things like that. I don't necessarily regret that, but it wasn't the right way to deal with it, right? The right way to deal with it was what I inevitably ended up doing, which was going deeper into my personal self-discovery and what I'm here to do, what my passions are, and what's meaningful to me.
Mm.
I think those were the biggest issues, and I think you're told constantly, especially from a young age, what you're supposed to do and who you're supposed to be by your parents, by your school, by whoever it is, by your culture. And the biggest issue that I have is that the most important thing for someone your age is to figure out who you are, and that's something that no one can tell you. And that's the hard thing about it. Everyone's telling you who you should be. No one can tell you who you are. And you're trying to figure that out amidst the noise of everyone telling you what to do and who to be, right?
Mm. So other people were the problem because they were inhibiting you from doing that in a way?
I think like especially now for you, social media, the internet, I think I experienced other people as it was like hostile. That's how I guess that's how it felt. Um, and I think it can be that way, especially when people don't know who they are and they're scared, right? Because the first thing that they're going to do is lash out in fear or confusion. And so I had to learn how to navigate that. I think that was my biggest issue
Mm.
while figuring out who I was
While figuring
amidst
out
all
who
that
you were.
noise, right?
Yeah. Would you
But be,
say stepping back from that noise was one of your better decisions?
yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's very difficult to be in the noise of other people and in the world without having charting your course, right? Because it's almost like a ship without a captain in this crazy ocean of a thousand other ships that are like just getting tossed about by a storm. If you don't have your sense of direction, being in the noise of other people is just a recipe for disaster. But if
Mm.
you have your sense of direction and you're in that noise, you have a compass and you're able to move with intention and clarity.
And you said you don't necessarily regret like that period of your life and what you did. What did you think, what do you think you got from it? What do you think was beneficial?
So it's like finding your way when you don't have a map. And I think that's part of like the initiation of a young person, right? Is that you're in the world and you have no clue what you're doing or what you want or why you want it, and you have to figure that out. And I think that's something that's so essential and it's such an important part or aspect of being young that I wouldn't say I regret any of it. Could I have done it better? Yes, probably. But do I regret that part of my life and the process that I had to undergo to get to where I am now? No, because I wouldn't be here, right?
Mm,
It's something that you have to go through, right? And it's part of being your age and it's part of being young in as a human being, I think, but especially now in the
yeah.
modern world, right? With all of the opinions, everyone's ideas. You
I told you about this concept in the gym, but I want your take on it now.
know?
Double jeopardy is my current scenario. Very few people are going to go through this, right? But it's to do with women being a minor, but looking as if you're in your 20s. So when you talk to people in their 20s, girls especially, they think, oh, they treat you a certain way. Oh, I could date you, right? But then when you tell them, you can't actually date them because you're a minor. And then when you talk or try to talk to girls younger than you or your age, the first impression is fucked because you look like you're in your 20s.
Sure.
If you were in that position, would you just keep trying until something worked? I mean, what would you do?
Yeah, just I mean, it sounds simple, but you got to just be yourself, right?
Mm,
Go with what works for you and go with what feels right, but also like be aware of that situation. It sounds like you are aware of it, right?
yeah,
So, I mean, that's going to change. I mean, you're gonna graduate high school and you're gonna go to college, and you'll be in the position I think you want to be in. I think
yeah,
you'll probably meet people that you connect with more in college, especially. So, I think this is a period of time thing. It'll blow over, but right now I understand that you're kind
yeah.
of in between a rock and a hard place, and it's not, you're trying to navigate something that's not giving way on either side. So,
Mm,
yeah, probably not an easy situation, but that'll be fixed. Give it like a couple of months here or there, right? You'll be all
yeah,
right.
yeah. Got you. You went to Bard College all the way up in I think New York, and then you went to which college? Was it Tech?
No, I went to VCU for my master's.
VCU. And I remember you telling me you thought Bard was your experience there was way better.
Yeah.
Why was that, do you think? What do you think is the difference between a liberal arts college and something more traditional or common?
So I think there are a lot of benefits to a liberal arts education. Mostly that it's a private curriculum, so it's in control of the institution and its donors.
Mm,
I think there's a lot of benefits to that because they are able to keep a wall up, essentially, from politics, so to speak. I learned philosophy from around the world. I learned literature from around the world. I learned culture from around the world. And that's something that Bard, I went to Simon's Rock at Bard. It was for people, I went to college when I was 16. It's for people, Simon's Rock and Bard itself is a conservatory for philosophy, culture, meaning, the humanities, right? They have really strong science too, right? Really strong STEM. But if you go to a private liberal arts institution, I mean, if you get your financial aid right, it can be reasonable, but it can still get expensive. You're getting a protected curriculum that's based around that kind of humanities discourse, right?
mm,
And I think that's something that's incredibly important, especially today, because it gives you exposure, not just to a narrow kind of grouping of ideas that's politically motivated, but it gives you exposure to ideas and experience of everyone from around the world,
mm.
right? And to connect with people from around the world and to share that. I'm not saying it's not possible in a public school, but I am saying I think it was very important for me because you go there as a freshman and you read philosophy all year. You're not doing the standard 2 years of um, basic courses, so to speak.
Yeah. Would you say not all liberal arts colleges are that way? You have to research.
Yeah, you have to research. We're at 1 minute, so let me stop this and close it, and then we just join right back onto the meeting, okay?
Yeah.
It's a time limit. Just join back onto the same link.